Hi, everybody. Welcome to a new episode of the Lead Podcast, where our intention is to support the development of future hospitality industry leaders. I'm really excited about this conversation today, not only because of our guest and her experience, but also the focus of conversation we're going to have today around the first team mindset. And we've written down redefining who you lead and how you lead them. And I wanted to read that because it's important because we want to stay on track. So no matter what position you're in a restaurant, multi-unit brand, or if you're working for a support office, this conversation is going to bring some structure and some new ideas for you to better support your people and yourself. Amy, it's good to see you.
Fabulous to see you as always, Matt. And I'm super, super excited to have Kelly Esten here. She is a freaking badass. And so grateful that you're spending some time with us. This first team mindset is something I talk to my team a lot. And I think it's interesting how people think about it. Sometimes they think about it the wrong way. So I think this is a very hot topic. And if people think about it and really execute this well, they can actually elevate their results pretty quickly. It's all about that trust, right? So, Kelly, tell us about yourself. She's a CMO at Toast and mom, wife. We're just talking about 11-year marriage, just all these things, wildly accomplished. But tell us who you are and why you want to do this podcast. And let's start digging into the first team mindset.
Awesome. Well, first of all, thank you, Amy and Matt, so much for having me. Love supporting the work you all are doing at Lead. As you mentioned, I'm Kelly. I'm the CMO at Toast, so I lead marketing and partnerships. I've been at Toast 8.5 years.
Just as long as you were married.
As long as I have 2 kids, and they're 9 and 5, and so it's like you kind of mark time that way, where it's like I joined Toast with a 1-year-old, and it feels like a lifetime ago. But it's been an incredible journey. I joined Toast when it was just a startup, a couple hundred people, a couple tens of millions of dollars in revenue, and we're now, 2 billion recurring publicly traded company, serving restaurant technology to restaurants of all shapes and sizes in the US and now in a few other countries too, which has been really fun.
Congrats. That's
Yeah.
huge.
But I first of all, my career over the last more than 9 years has been, really shaped by people investing in me from a leadership perspective and from realizing that what makes me successful is the teams that I lead, the ability to work with them through them. And so it's really all about the people. And so excited to give back in this way.
Love that. Thank you so much. So tell us of what the first team mindset means and how it can redefine how you lead when you use it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, oftentimes, especially when we get into management or leadership roles, you think a lot about the people on your team and how do I take my direct reports and help them be successful? And of course, that's a big part of your job as a manager. But the first team concept is actually that the team you should be investing the most in and who you should be thinking about as your primary team is actually your peer set, not your direct reports. And I first came across this concept in a book called The Five Dysfunctions of a Team. And actually, the Toast leadership team all read this book a couple years ago when we were doing a little bit of a leadership reset. And it was a great opportunity for us to look at each other across the room on the executive team at Toast and say, wait a second, this is the team that we have to really go all in on is my peer in sales, my peer in product, my legal counterpart, my finance business partner, who really helps make sure that I'm successful, aligned, and that we're all on the same page. And when you do that as a leadership team, it actually makes it easier for the teams below you because otherwise you're leaving these, your mid-level managers and your individual contributors to figure it out for themselves and get aligned versus starting that alignment with your first team and growing it from there. And we can talk a little bit about how we establish that. But actually, the more powerful thing we've done over the last year or two is taken that first team concept and brought it to all different levels within Toast. And so, for example, something I did this year is really invest in my mid level managers and teaching them how to be first team to each other. And it's been one of the most powerful drivers of engagement for them and for results in our business because it's allowed them to move faster and have more alignment kind of on the working teams as they've gotten stood up. So that's a high level overview of what first team means, but we can chat more.
I love it. There's something because I think often when there's change, and especially watching the growth that I've watched Toast go through, I could imagine the pressure internally, to be honest, right? You've disrupted an industry. But looking at, was there anything, not getting in specifics, that you could share before the first team concept was taken on? Was there friction happening, or like, hey, we need to pause as a leader? Because every team's going, it's 2026 planning.
Yeah.
So I want the audience to hear, sometimes you have to pause and reflect and say, hey, things are good, but what do we need to do different? What do
Yeah.
you collectively? Was there a moment that kind of forced it? And then what was the mindset shift coming out of it? Like, what shifted for the leaders? Because that
Mhm.
sessions are easy, but stickiness is hard.
Yeah. So, the thing that really prompted it a couple, as I said, like about 2 years ago, is actually some leadership changes at Toast. So, one of our founders, Aman Narang, became CEO. And with that came some changes. Naturally, a new leader comes into place, some changes in who's on the leadership team and how we operate. And so we had this opportunity where we had introduced some change into the organization where we wanted to establish really strong trust and also a really open culture. Sometimes you end up in these places where there's pockets of people that work really well together and then pockets of places where there's not as much alignment. And so, one of the things we did after we read the book and talked about this idea of first team is we said everything has to be said in the room. Sometimes you get into these situations as a team where you have a meeting, you kind of go through the motions, and then the side phone calls start happening or the side Slack start happening. And what we really tried to do is say, hey, if you have something to say, you got to say it in the room, even if you think, oh, I don't want to say it in front of that person, or I don't want to be critical, or I don't want to be tough on someone. And that moment of saying, hey, if there's an issue or there's something that we need to talk about, let's put it on the table and talk about it in front of everyone and then move through it as a team really helped reset the way we interact with each other, the way we talk to each other, and actually built more trust, even if you were saying some harder things, because you knew kind of where you stood and how we move the business forward is going to be talking about the hard things together as a team versus saving them to go figure them out, with your functional team or maybe with like your closest partner. Versus saying, no, we're going to take our whole first team, we're going to work through these issues together because that's what's going to make the business more successful.
And was there a mindset shift for yourself personally coming out of it? Because I think, conflict can be hard for some of us. And Amy and I have had a chance to talk about this at length. But what shifted most for you coming out of those initial resets as a team, and how you're going to communicate?
Yeah, there's a couple things. One is I've always been a big believer in sharing context with my team. And, if I describe my leadership style to new people joining my team or people I'm working with for the first time, I always say, my job is to give you as much context as I can about what's going on in the business and what's going on in the market so that you can be enabled to do your best work. And, one of the things that really struck me after watching how the first team mindset operated at the executive team level was like, oh, I have to set this up for my team because that's not how we're operating within marketing right now.
Yeah.
And so, how we bring that down through the team has been the big aha moment for me. And like I said, I alluded to earlier, there's about 17 managers across marketing that are our kind of like core mid level managers in marketing. And there was some misalignment between them on priorities, handoffs, decision making, cross functional collaboration were some of the things that were popping up as needing improvement. And finally, we said, wait a second, 17 people, we can all sit around a table. So we got everyone together in person and we looked around and I said, this is everyone. This is the whole management team in marketing. And they all kind of looked around and said, oh, wait, we all like can know each other. There's only 17 of us. We can spend time. We can all have each other's cell phone numbers. We can pick up the phone and talk to each other. And that big aha was that this group is a group you can get your arms around. And if you can get your arms around a group like that as your first team and start treating each other like, hey, if I have an issue, I'm going to call someone else sitting around this table. I'm not going to try and go up and down the chain and call a big meeting or whatever. Like, I'm just going to call the people at this table and we're going to figure it out. It's been a huge unlock for the ability to feel empowered to move things forward in the business. And I think it's like, how do we keep expanding this concept to different working teams, to different leadership teams, even to our customers and partners? That's been the big, like, aha moment and unlock for me.
It's brilliant.
Uh, the the changes, it sounds phenomenal, and that the communication just really improved. My question is, how do you do that and how do you hold people accountable to that? Because you may have one or two, 17 people may sound small to some, large group to others that are running small organizations, right? but how do you actually build that behavior and hold people accountable to it? Because it is a mindset shift that all of a sudden you're sitting around a table and somebody's giving you some really tough feedback or hard critical conversations in front of a group, and you're still building the trust. So, because the base of that five dysfunctions is the trust so that you can have the healthy conflict. But how do you get there? And how did you get the team there?
Yeah. I think first is you have to spend time to get to know people. And Amy, you're so good at this. I know this is how you lead, but spending the time to understand the people you're working with, whether it's sharing a meal or it's doing a little bit of a team building exercise or sharing something about your values or where you come from or why you are the way you are and think the way you think, is a huge piece of building trust. But I also think it's just like practice and reinforcement. It's not it's still not easy sometimes to hear things, especially in a bigger room. And
Mm.
it's something I even tell myself is like, it's okay. It's about the work, not about me. And I think separating out um talking about the work and how it can get better versus the people is a big piece. And so, I think you've heard this before or said this before. Maybe it's like hard on results, hard on outcomes, easy on people. And how do you make it as much as possible about the work when you're giving feedback, thinking about the process, thinking about the output versus criticizing people, which I think is a huge piece of making it a safe space to have like real discussions about what's working, what's not.
Yeah, I love that it's not personal, it's professional, and it's really cool though when you see the lights go on, and I know that you do this with your team where they're like, "Okay, I get it. She loves me as a person. She wants to help me develop as a person. But if I can take this feedback and action on it, I can actually become even better in my role." And it sometimes it is tough for people to get there. I do think it also holds
And
people back. So I love that
uh,
you're doing that for your team. That's a big gift for them.
yeah, Matt mentioned like you've seen Toast go through a lot of growth.
Yeah.
And one thing we talk about is like we all have to grow as fast as Toast, especially as leaders. And
Oh, that
so
gave me chills. That's so true.
yeah, if I'm not growing as fast as Toast, I'm not going to be able to keep up with being able to lead at the next phase and the next scale. And so we all have to be growing. And how do we make that feel like part of the culture and the job, especially as leaders, it starts with us too.
Mhm.
I think, Kelly, it's one thing that you shared that was really quickly up front. You shared when you had your direct reports and team, you shared your leadership style, your personality style. And I think that's just, I just won't go too deep in it, but so powerful for people to understand how do we show up. So we're often looking how our team reports and shows up, but how do they understand our leadership style and how we show up and how we grow? But when it comes to first team concept, one thing that's you're working on is bringing the concept to different audiences and now bring it to your partners. And if you think inside a restaurant, you have your direct first team, your staff team, and your guest team. But how is Toast starting to bring this concept to your partners, and how is that working for you?
Yeah, I started thinking about this because I before marketing, I led our enterprise business. And one of the things that made me more successful in that role was when I started to spend more time outside of Toast. And I got to know a lot of restaurant leaders, a lot of our partners on the technology side, implementation partners. There's a whole ecosystem of people that makes Toast successful, especially in a mid market or enterprise size brand. And so I started to realize that I was actually talking to people every day that didn't work at Toast that were helping me make the right decisions about, prioritizing the way we're doing onboarding, for example, or which partners to spend the most time with to help progress deals, or which customers to get feedback from. And it really became to a place where I was talking to customers and partners at the same kind of rate on a daily basis, the way I was talking to my direct reports or my first team at Toast. And so that realization that customers and partners could be on my first team as a person,
Mm.
a big deal. And I think people talk about like a board of directors, which is someone you call for advice, a couple times a year when you're making a career change or you're trying to get feedback on a big, challenge you're having. I was realizing I was operating with these people. These are people that I'm talking to every day that are helping me operate and show up in my job in the best way. And so, something that we talk to our marketing team about is, let's not make a decision ever without a customer. And whether it's a name or a message or the way a campaign shows up, like how do we get feedback constantly? And you can run a structured process, and there's times and places to go get customer feedback and like run a survey or do focus groups. But there's also times where you just text someone and you say, "Hey, what do you think about this?" And that like day to day closeness and having a handful of relationships that you can lean on to help you make those decisions with the outside of toast context has been really powerful. And, we have our customer advisory board is a great example of this. We have an SMB customer advisory board and an enterprise one. And the SMB customer advisory board, traditionally an advisory board gets together once a quarter and looks at the roadmap and gives feedback. That team is saying, your sales decks need to be better. This marketing campaign's resonating. This one's not. Why are you doing referrals this way or that way? They are in our business and they are part of the team, and they don't want boundaries, and we don't want them now either, because they have opinions and input and ideas about not just, hey, here's what I'm building in the POS for the customer, but like how we run Toast. And so we're welcoming them in and making them part of the team. And so I think you can pull some of these same principles through where it's like, actually, let's not be afraid to tell our customers some of the hard things we're thinking about, trade-offs in our business or ways we're trying to communicate to customers around hard things. And if we let them in, they'll actually be on our team and help us make the best decision.
I freaking love that you're using them as a first team model and getting the feedback. I always tell, tech folks when they call or they need something, I'll say, how are you making sure the end user's in mind? And a lot of the tech companies right now, they don't think about the integrations, they don't think about the end user. They're building what they think that the community needs. And it's not always what the community needs. So it is great that you're actually getting live feedback from the end users. I just think that's so critical that you're thinking them as your first team. I hadn't thought about it that way before, so that's awesome. How do you step back and then think about, I'm a manager listening in and I'm a manager in a restaurant, or I'm working in a tech company and I've got a team I'm leading, or the other day I was mentoring a woman from a restaurant that works in IT in her department, and she's, trying to figure out how she brings systems along. How what would you recommend to actually go, what would be the first action, the second action, and how do you start to build that? Because it's really critical to do, but it's not always easy.
Yeah, it's not. You know, the way we've done it each time is actually narrate. Like I always say to my managers, sometimes it's really helpful to narrate what you're doing as a manager. So, as a manager, you may have a reason you're asking certain questions or you're interacting certain ways with managers or leaders, and they might not understand why you're doing that. For example, I'm getting more involved in this project, or I'm stepping back from this project, or I'm giving feedback about this topic or that topic. Sometimes, as an individual contributor, you're like trying to demystify, like, why is my manager doing this? And so something that I tell my team is like narrate your management to your team and say, hey, like based on what I've been seeing and the way we're interacting and the way we're having some trouble with cross functional collaboration and like who gets to make these decisions, I think we should try this first team thing. Like, are you guys up for the 10 of us getting together and establishing some norms about how we interact? And let's try this. And just being explicit about I think this could be like our most important team. If the 5 of us or the 10 of us or the 3 of us get really tight and really aligned, I think it'd make a really big difference. Are you guys up for that? And just calling it out loud, what you're doing, and bringing together the people that you think are going to be most helpful to do that. And like I said, it could be a customer, a partner, and a couple, the front of house and the back of house manager in the restaurant. Like it could just be as simple as 3 to 4 or 5 people get together and say, this is who we're going to invest in. And we're going to invest in each other and our relationship and the way we operate so that we can work together to make the best decisions and the best impact in our business. And as simple as that. And don't be afraid to say what you're doing.
And I love what you said earlier that I think is so important, is breaking bread outside the four walls sometimes and going to a dinner or going to grab coffee, and you're not allowed to talk about work. You're just
Yeah.
getting to know each other. Matt's family vacation in Cabo and all the things, right? So I think it's critical that people step outside and do that and do get to know each other and what makes them, like you said earlier, Kelly, like what makes them tick, why they are the way they are and to understand each other a little bit more because when you show up in a meeting I'm like, "Oh, I know why they act like that." Like, they just went through something or you know what I mean? Or something's going on. I think it's we're in the people business, whether you're selling tech or, supporting tech or running a restaurant, we're still all in the people industry, and I think that the first team piece can really bring each other together, and man, you can achieve just about anything if you've got that first team mentality going on in your business.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing is when you're having those hard conversations, because once you establish your team, you're going to start having some hard conversations and being more direct. And to your point about someone shows up and they've had a tough thing happen outside of work, is like, sometimes you read faces, you go, oh gosh, but then reminding yourself it's not always about me and knowing where everyone else is coming from, what they're bringing into the room that day, what might else be on their mind helps take some of that like heat out of it and the personal side. Because if you all know each other as people and you start having those hard conversations, naturally you get a little like, oh, prickly. But remembering it's not always about you, it's about the work. And how do you focus there can be another like really important next step.
Love that.
And Kelly and Amy just shared the big Kelly, what you shared, what big thing is it's not always about me. Like that was one of my thing working with different leaders and teams. I would get emotionally tied up in the situation, but when you can step back and see it, and I've watched Amy do this in so many different settings at a world class level. It's just got to bring the human side back and say she sees
Cut
she,
it out.
them, and then when she sees you as a person, then we can get to the what's really in the way. One thing that our audience really loves are rich and vivid stories, like just examples. We find that they really land, and that's when we get the messages and the text. But as you implement people first, is there an example where you saw a hard conversation through your own lens happen, or just the strategy in place? Like, what was just a little bit of context where they might be able to relate themselves in their restaurant that'll motivate them to go and step into it or step into the opportunity or conversation that's there?
Yeah. I think one good example of that is so I grew up on the strategic side of marketing, more numbers, more doing the like how do we translate product features into messages for customer side of work. And as I've stepped into the CMO seat, a place where I have the opportunity to give feedback is on the creative side. And one thing that I've had to learn is like, how do I give feedback to creatives on things like, color palettes and, video production and the creative side of the business that isn't my like core expertise. I Amy knows I wear a lot of dresses, and it's partly so I have to put together an outfit. And it's that's not my
Always
that's
stunning, always
thank
stunning.
you, thank you. And I'm wearing my orange today for toast. But it is something where you say, okay, this is an area where it's not my like default comfort zone, but I still need to find a way to give feedback. And so one of the things early on in the role that I was trying to figure out is like, how do I work with creative directors and say, hey, like, um, this isn't landing for me, but didn't always have the words as to why,
Mm.
didn't have the vocabulary to say, hey, these are the things I'd like to change and here's why. And so something that I did that really helped my relationship with the creative side of the business was I asked them, I said, I want to give you feedback, but I need you to help me with some language of like, how can my feedback be helpful to you? Because I have a sense that when I've been given feedback recently, my feedback isn't landing with you and you're not like taking it to heart.
I love that you even paused to do that.
Yeah,
That's
I'm like,
great.
I can tell you're not hearing me and you're frustrated and I'm frustrated. And so what's the language that like you can give me so that I can give you constructive feedback in places that it's helpful and is like more strategic direction versus getting in the weeds of all the little details that they're obviously better at than me. And so they were able to give me things like here are some words that we use to describe the brand, the tone of voice, the way we want to show up. Some of our brand values, for example, are welcoming and bold, and
Mm.
now I can give feedback and say, like, this isn't really hitting on bold for me. Like, I'd love to see more come out and like we can get a little bit punchier here, or we can go out a little bit more on a limb. And that's much more constructive and helpful feedback than me watching a video and going, I don't know, it's kind of, I don't know, it's not really resonating, or it's boring or whatever. But being able to have that feedback both ways of what's the best and most constructive way I can go and give you that feedback, because you're the expert in your area, but that doesn't mean that I'm not going to have an opinion or have a push for you. And so that give and take is really key.
That probing questions, so good, Kelly. So good. I mean, if you think about if every leader or the managers listening to this did that, how much more impactful the feedback sessions and the communication and the clarity would be. I absolutely love that. I think that's a big takeaway. Lots of good takeaways.
And then as we got 2 questions remaining, and one, we just wanna leave some tactical steps. How can somebody what would you recommend for them to better understand the concept, embrace the concept, to implement the concept? I know it's a bit of repetition from the question I just asked, but less of the story, more of the steps. Should they read 5 dysfunctions, or how do they start?
Definitely. Yeah. I'd say like I still read management books. I make it a huge practice, and so does everyone else on the team at Toast. So go read Five Dysfunctions of a Team.
Best
Uh,
book.
there's even a little like worksheet you can do with your team to evaluate where you are. And so really actionable and something that you could do with the people that you think might be your first team as a kickoff to having that conversation. And then I think Amy's right on. Like, get a little group of people together who you think you can make a difference with in your business. Have a meal, talk about it, set up some psychological safety, share a little bit that's personal, and start trying to have those more open and honest and direct conversations.
Love that.
And then just what's a mindset shift for a leader? What needs to shift for you to be able to take on a new concept? So we're all, a lot of us, we've got phones, content's free, we can consume. What have you seen in the people and yourself and people around you to shift their mindset to do different?
For me, it's a really intentional practice because it's the default is to slip back into the way you've always operated. And we all do that. Like it happens on a regular basis to me as well. And I still catch kind of bad habits in myself where I see, oh, this project's gone a little off the rails. And I think, I know exactly what to do. I haven't delegated appropriately. Did I give the right context? Have I set up the checkpoints? Is the team empowered? And do they all have the right mindset to go do this? It's always the same things that creep back in. And so something that I do that I find really helpful is I'm old school this way, but I write down each week like what are the things I want to focus on? Are there some mindsets that I want to be bringing into the week? And I literally put it on a piece of paper and spend time thinking about that intentionally each week. And then every day I revisit it. And I just think it is not something that doesn't come without practice. And something that I try and remind myself and my team is that management is a practice, just like any other skill. It's just like soccer or, I have young kids learning to read. It's like you have to practice it. And management is a practice, just like any other skill, totally learnable. But it takes that time to step back and practice and try to put the concept into place over and over again.
I had to write that down for myself. That was awesome. I hope one day I get to work with you, Kelly. I'm just the biggest fan and really, really appreciate you being honest. I know Matt, you got a recap for us. He does this wild thing where he recaps and I'm like, what?
I just think for me, like I really appreciate Kelly's time and the amount of
Yeah.
growth that she's led. But I think that there's some care and simplicity in a very complicated message. This is something I'll go back and watch again. There's ahas in this episode that if you spend time with and share, like I said, was at a point of friction where a change had to happen to go from a couple tens of millions of dollars to reoccurring 2 billion in revenue. There's success in all these growth stories, but not once did we talk about business performance. We talked about people. I'm just a little humbled by the conversation. And Amy's a little bit more thoughtful. But I think when we look to the leaders out there, the intention's to do different, to watch these episodes and hopefully we disrupt something in you for you to do different for yourself and your team. But Amy, before we close that today, I think we've got some more cities on the calendar. I know we're not going to get dates because we're going to hold those back, but what's coming up for Lead this year?
We've got Kansas City, March 24th.
Yeah.
Matt is headlining and speaking at that on how to develop others. That's going to be fantastic. Emily Williams Knight, Karen Stutz is doing a financial class. It's going to be highly impactful. Eric Knott, who's local there in Kansas City, is coming to speak on leadership. Then we'll have Boston and at the Easy Cater office with that team. They're hosting. And then we've got most likely the NRA in DC and Austin, most likely with the group who's been a huge help for us with Jack Gibbons and FB Society. So A lot of events next year. Again, we only pack the room with 100 people, so it's intimate. And you can learn from C-suite leaders. So make sure that once we announce those dates, you get your tickets. We only charge $30, $40 so that people can afford to come and learn. It is a nonprofit. We're all here volunteering, trying to make sure that we retain and develop those in our industry that are currently wanting to. And as Kelly said, I'll leave it as I'm going to steal this for a long time, which is, management is a practice and it takes a while. And for those listening that are working on it and working on leadership, read the five dysfunctions, work on the pyramid within your team, work on the first team, and remember that it takes time. Kelly, myself, Matt, nobody got to their positions where they are now without goofing up along the way and investing in themselves. So thanks for being here, Matt and Kelly. I love you both and have the best week ever.
Thanks for having me.